Yo, how's it going? Been a while. I don't think I've actually gotten a video up in about a month. It's a little bit complicated. Really struggled with something new this year, which is that I'm working with a lot of different teams, meaning that, like, one thing I'm very careful about is I don't want working with me to be a liability. I don't want people to say, well, I don't want to show Google this stuff because if I show Google this stuff, it's going to become public knowledge, and that's going to lead to issues for people working with me. And I know that I had friends going to the North American Materia Cup that had things they were working on, and I didn't want to spill the beans on a lot of decks and things. But I wanted to do a tier list talking about the current format. And actually, let me pull this up real quick because I think it's important. A bit of live editing done cheap. But I do these about every set. I try to do them usually before the first major tourney. This time I'm cheating a little bit, just because um, like I said, I wanted to let my friends get a chance to kind of show off some of their decks before they get there. But I think that now that we've had two Japanese Masters tourneys, a Materia Cup this weekend, I think it's pretty fair game to say that, like, the format is relatively understood for people that want to know where to look. So I want to talk my thoughts through on things, but so real quick, kind of the way I like to tier things, and we're gonna go ahead and just change these. But one, two, maybe 1 point, or yeah, two, three, rogue, and everything else. I really like breaking things down with Tier 1. These are decks that you should expect to be winning your top winning events. You should prepare for these. Tier 2, less common than the above. You probably need a favorable bracket or some kind of unknown innovation, but you can win events with Tier 2 decks. Tier 3, I think these decks can sneak in a top cut, but I think they need a lot of luck, and I don't expect them to actually win any tourneys unless, or with a sufficient sample size. Rogue, these are decks with pretty severe flaws, but I think that they are decks you might want to know for Swiss rounds, things you could conceivably see. Everything else, if it doesn't show up here, it probably falls into this category. This is where decks like Bart's Boko are, where they're fun, they're cool, but I really don't think that they're like super necessary to know what they do. In general, I think the format's actually in a pretty fun place. So, admittedly, it's not perfect. I think that, like, aggro in particular is still really frustrating to play against in the game. But I think that, like, I'm having a lot of fun playing, experimenting with tons of different decks. I probably have more decks built in Materia Hunter for this set than I have for any of the last sets, like the last two sets combined. Just everything I'm doing seems to be working in a way that, like, man, maybe this is actually good now. And I think it's a really exciting place for the game to be. So let's kind of start going through. Let's start putting decks into tiers, and let's kind of talk about things as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and start by putting the best deck in the format, which I think is currently probably Knights. I think that Knights is just really well positioned to win events. It's aggressive, which means that it's difficult to play against. It's aggressive. You have nut draws where you just kind of win the game on the spot. It's difficult to play around, and I really think that, like, I don't know if people are getting complacent, but, like, Knights players are starting to get greedy and get away with it. Things like cutting Renoa from the list are, like, able to raise the ceiling, but, like, it means that, like, a turn 0 Amaterasu is still devastating for this deck, I feel like, if you could just leave the Corella on field and deal with, like, a 7-turn clock. But I think the deck is by far the strongest, like the most likely deck to see at a tourney, and the one that's most likely to win most tourneys. Small thing, I actually don't think that Knights is better served with Yuna. I think the deck is kind of, like, if Knights has weaknesses, I think the turn 0 Amaterasu on Corilla, like the ability to just, like, stop her from having text. I think Sid Randell could potentially actually, like, this is the best Sid Randell format since Opus 21. And Sid Randell kind of shuts this deck down cold outside of, like, finding Clyde Ifrit. But I think that like outside of those, I think Knights is very, very well positioned at the moment, which shouldn't be a surprise. It won the first NA Materia Cup. I would expect it to be probably a third of top cut in Kansas. It's very difficult to plan for and play against. The other deck that's kind of an elephant in the room, I think, is Yuna, and I'm going to put this in tier one, but I'm going to put it in there with an asterisk because I don't think anybody knows what the Yuna deck is supposed to look like still. The only thing we're pretty sure of at this point is that it's playing Yuna and it's playing a lot of forwards. Japan is currently experimenting a lot with the Opus 14 Golbez as a way to just flip forwards onto the field over and over again. We're seeing players like KP experiment with like Vikings and Earth cards and Pseudo Vikings, which is like forwards that are effectively free because they draw you a card when they enter, and therefore you can kind of get to a critical mass of forwards very quickly with Yuna. And she's honestly just getting splashed in a bunch of stuff. I think she raises the bar for FF4 and FF6 in a way that really wasn't true until now. Just an absolute house of a card. Very scary, honestly. I think that people laugh. We got rid of like one like absolute super threat in chaos and replaced it with another. I think there are downsides to Yuna though, and I think there are more than people realize. She can't do anything against action abilities. So I think that cards like Braska could really enter. And I think that like if people start teching for this deck, I think there are actually a lot of weird things that just destroy Yuna as a card. She's really poorly positioned against Axstar, thanks to Axstar having 3 different autos, 2 of which are must cancels for, because it's really difficult for Yuna to effectively stop all of the abilities from resolving. I think that like if lightning decks ever find a foothold in the meta as well, I think Ixion is going to be a massive issue because I don't think Yuna is going to be able to rebuild very easily. But it is a really, really strong card if it's given any space whatsoever to breathe. The third deck that probably needs to be talked about is going to be Warriors. Warriors is just kind of it's like been this way since about Opus 22. But like Tyvis decks just kind of are anti-meta in their own way. They have a decent late game. They have a very strong ability to play early game against kind of really slow control decks. Turns out that just like searching Axstar and playing Axstar is really good. Mog is a really strong card. And actually, I said it in my set review that like Volker is a card that's really scary because I think that Volker could have been like really, really pushed and really broken the deck in a way that like would have been unhealthy against stuff like Wind. I think it is really good in those matchups. But what I didn't really conceptualize with Volker was it's actually a really good follow-up to Tyvis. So like one of the things that happens with Tyvis sometimes, like say you play your Tyvis on, you go Larsa, search Tyvis, play your Tyvis. Well, if you already have your Mog in hand, you can search for Volker and then search for 2 forwards and just play both of them, which is completely unique now to the deck. And it gives it this really strong top end, and if your opponent answers your Tyvis, well, you just jam the Volker, play your next Tyvis, and go off. Like it's actually like really, really interesting seeing the developments. I actually think that like Volker is a really strong card in Tyvis decks, like those Warrior decks, in a way that I really didn't anticipate just reading Volker because like I always thought of Volker as like the lead in play, but I actually think he's like a much better follow-up play when your opponent's already struggling to answer the card advantage that Tyvis is generating. Really interesting development there. I think the card is really strong. Gotta put Refia decks in tier 1, obviously. Refia is as good as she has always been. I know a lot of other Refia pilots are kind of getting off of the deck. Mike Powell said that like I was talking to him a little bit after the weekend, and he thinks that like the deck felt terrible for him. But I think that like it's Refia. Because Refia basically plays 25 non-engine, it can find a way to adapt to the Knights and Yuna meta, and the top end of Refia is still just like pretty much unmatched for a deck that can get there as consistently as Refia does. I really don't agree with some of Mike's choices. Like, I really don't like Cloud and Refia. I get the idea, but It's not really an engine piece for the deck. It doesn't really play nicely. It just kind of like gives Refia like an okay monster answer, but like to me, Refia already has an okay monster answer with like just trying to Shantoto, or like a Mott the realm so the monster player doesn't get off the ground, right? So I still think that Refia has a lot of legs. I will be shocked if Refia doesn't win a Materia Cup or a JP Masters tourney before the set is over. Um, and like being totally honest, I'm not going to be at New Zealand this weekend. But if I was, I would probably be there playing a Refia deck if I was. I just think it just does everything. The last like very clearly tier one deck that I want to talk about is Realm, and this is like kind of tricky because to me there's like two Realm decks that like everybody's gonna think of. There's the Mono Water Realm, I guess three: Mono Water Realm, Water Fire Realm, Water Lightning Realm. I actually think Water Wind Realm is completely viable right now. Might need to go to like three like Cancelev to like try to turn zero a Corilla, but like I think cards like Garuda and Tidus are actually like pretty decently positioned right now to handle a lot of what's going on, and like the ability to like run cards like Marlborough in engine kind of give this deck a lot of legs into what the other decks are doing. I think that like Knights can be a little bit of a struggle, and Warriors can be a little bit of a struggle, but it should have a really good Refia matchup, and it should do really like it should do well into Yuna as well. We'll kind of talk a little bit more about it when we get to some of these other decks that I have in here. Um, I think that's about all that I would really put in like tier one for like the decks that I think that like are most likely to win an event. I think that like five sounds about right. So let's kind of go through and let's start kind of piecing together where the rest of these decks are ending up. Um, Very easily, Megissa should go right in tier two. I think that it's going to be very highly represented by good players. It's very strong, very good deck. Um, I think that like the printing of Ifrit is nice for it. It doesn't really like break the deck or anything or put it over the top, especially because like if your opponent doesn't have a forward in play, then like the Ifrit's a dead card kind of. But like it doesn't hurt. The deck now gets like a bit of reach while being able to ping the Megissa, and like the deck doesn't care about its own backups anyway. Um, I think that like it's a pretty decent Chaos Arc format. If you look at the top decks, most of them are getting two types or two elements of forwards on in play at any given point. In particular, I think Earth Water is probably the best one. Still, just it's gonna like I think the big like thing holding it back is it's going to really struggle into Unidex due to a lack of just like forwards in general and kind of like ways of forcing the Una to burn her triggers. But just a really strong deck in general. I wouldn't be surprised to see it doing well at events. I think Mono Earth still does kind of Mono Earth things. Does really well into Knights. I could see a world where it has an okay Una matchup. Does struggle into Refia. Does have a rough time into Knights sometimes. But like I think this deck is still in a very very strong spot. That actually includes I think the FF7 variant. I think both of these are really good decks. Um, I have Ferris here representing Vikings. This actually probably should go in tier one thanks to Yuna. I think Ferris probably is not really necessary for the deck because the deck shouldn't care that much about the sizes of the forwards in it. Um, but like, admittedly, the Ferris does help a lot in some matchups, so it could be an interesting one out for the deck actually. Now that I think about it, but I guess I'll sneak that into tier one because the deck is doing really really well. Gigawall, I'm going to put in tier 2. I think it's still really strong. I think, in particular, Chaos leaving the format is really good for it. I think that its like matchup into Chaos was not very good, which was one of the big things holding it back everywhere except for Europe. And it's kind of why the deck fell off really hard in Opus 23, it felt like, despite being extremely powerful. I think the printing of the Gullwing forwards, like Yuna and Riku, are really, really important for this deck now. It could finally kind of ditch the water that it like really doesn't want to play, and you can play like the wind package for like Yuna, Brother, and Riku, and cards like Zidane to rip cards from hand. Really, really fun deck actually. If you haven't played it, kind of the way your plays all cascade into each other is really cool. Um, Cadets are actually seeing results for the first time ever. I think a lot of this is just the sheer power of Queen, but also turns out Sid Highwind, because the deck wants to be in Water Lightning, or sorry, Wind Lightning. You can play Sid Highwind for Cloud and Yuffie as like defensive options, while having the Cadet package to try to like kind of force tempo in a way that I don't think a lot of decks are ready to deal with. It's topping in Japan and JP Masters. It's actually like it's really close, honestly, which is cool. We haven't had a Wind Lightning deck like ever. Honestly, I don't think it's just not an element combination that's really worked very well. What else? I'm gonna put Water Lightning, like Water Lightning Scions, like kind of in tier two. Kind of another anti-meta deck in particular. Water Lightning Monsters is one of the most popular ways of building it, but also like Water Lightning Scions just kind of has a big burst amount, like which can really help into Knights. In particular, like the fact that the Stola special just completely solos the Knight's field by herself is really important to the deck. It can struggle a little bit with getting to that point because like the Knights player can just go ham and expect to not get like interacted with. But I do think it's a deck that like will be seeing play in Top Cut. Actually, I really like Mono Ice Control still. I think that like it's a really solid tier two area deck right now. I think like the ability to either play the primals through Torgal, so you can play Clyde Ifrit, but even just like one of the decks I've had the most fun with is Steve D's Mono Ice Chaos Arc deck is really strong actually, and I think like last set like the Une Mono Ice decks are really really solid. A lot of potential there. Bart's Refi, I actually think I'm gonna put Bart's up in tier one. This is a bit weird because I'm not the biggest Bart's expert, but I think if there was a Bart's format, this might be the format for it. Um, so Bart's Refia was kind of at its most popular towards the end of Opus 22. Because it kind of, I think, was intended to help with the Knights matchup, actually. Bart's could special for a Warrior of Light, or the other Bart's had the special that effectively worked like a Braska in a way, which could just help kind of clear Lastwell out. And I think that it could do similar things to a Una deck, honestly, where like you could use it to like very quickly try to like stick in early Bart's and use that as a way to just kind of keep Una off the field. And if Una's not on the field, then you're probably favored to win those games. But it is kind of just a Refia variant. I don't think it's necessary for Refia to do well. And you probably are conceding some points against some other decks in the meta to do that. But it's worth considering if you're playing a Refia deck. Maybe consider making it a Bart's build. Um, Alright, what else do we have here? We have a lot of cards to talk about. Ice Lightning actually is a deck that I'm going to put in tier 2. There's a lot of variants of this. You could play Turks with it. I think that the Reno Rude stuff is really, really good. I think that Soldiers are going to be kind of in Ice Lightning, and they're really, really strong. It's a really open format, like I said. There's a lot of things that are good. Clive, by the way, I'm going to put this kind of next to this. Like the priming version of like the Mono Ice Control deck is really good. But yeah, like Ice Lightning, like whether you build it Soldiers, whether you build it Turks, whether you build it just like mid-range good stuff, like I played at Continentals last year, I think it just has so much potential to into the format. And notable, Al Cid is really good into Yuna and Karilla because he generates a lot of auto abilities that those decks have to deal with or they're going to lose the game, right? Um, just kind of positions the deck really well in the current format, I think, in a way that it hasn't been in the previous opus. Let's put some stuff in tier 3. I think the Odin OTK stuff, probably about tier 3. I think it's a bit too Timmy. Any deck that interacts really does kind of stop this, even if it, like, when this deck works, it is very powerful. I think the Arden flip decks, you're better off playing like Hithlo combo. Hithlo combo, I'm going to put in tier 3, mostly due to a lack of results. I really don't know why there aren't more results for this deck, because I think it's like pretty damn good. But I do think that like it is a deck that should be respected, and I do think it is actually capable of winning an event, depending on kind of the matchups it can dodge. I think Yuna would be a big problem for the deck, unfortunately. But FF13 kind of can go here. I think that like it still is a better deck than people give it credit for, because it kind of does the Knights thing but worse. But like doing the Knights thing but worse is still really good, honestly. There are decks that just aren't equipped to handle this. FF6, I think, is a deck that's really slept on. I actually think it's like, if it's a personal list, I actually might put this here. I really like the way that it plays with Yuna, and the way it plays against Yuna, actually. FF6 is known to be a very good anti-aggro deck. You could use it to potentially slow down Knights by just like beelining for Edgar Sabin, which is the same thing that like the deck has done since the dawn of time. But also now you can run Yuna in the deck. Sabin's second special activates your forward, so you get just like a free Miwa. I think it's really, really strong, really slept on, and a deck that like I think if one person wanted to one trick it, I do think there's a chance this deck could actually get there at the right event. Played well. I think the Crystal stuff is one of the decks with the most potential in the game. I don't think that it's solved at all, but there's got to be something there. The cards are just too strong overall to not think that there's something worth finding in this package. I'm gonna put Waltzes in tier 3. I think that like there's maybe an argument that like Waltzes could do well into some of the top tier decks, but I think that like the issues holding Black Mages and Black Waltzes back haven't really been solved. I'm gonna put Dragoons and Rogue. Same for Ninjas. I think that like both of these are really cool tribal decks. Probably Monks as well. Really cool tribal decks. I don't really think that like any of them hold a candle to like Scions or Knights or Warriors, but I don't think they're that far off. I like especially could see like Ninjas or Monks doing something, just given that like these are pretty solid like the foundations for these I think are a little bit solider than Dragoons, which like has to play critical mass of Dragoons, but hasn't gotten any good Dragoon cards in a long time. I think that like Kane is a big buff for Dragoons, but like not enough to matter. And Tenzin is like still I think really strong, but requires you to build Mono Fire in a way that Mono Fire isn't necessarily wanting to be built right now. Okay, so now that we've cleaned this out a little bit, I'm gonna put Chaos in tier 3. I think that like there's still some potential for like this like kind of a combo aggro deck where you like drop a Roche or like a Machina, and then you like warp an Astinian, and then you like punch, and then you go like chaos, and then like mill, and then like that hits like a Fujin Raijin, you like get in there for game. Like I could see a world where that's good, but it's so much more fragile now that like I really don't expect it to be a thing. Sky Pirates probably should fall under Rogue, like the classical ones with the 60p Vaughn. I know that like it's the one of the promo cards for the current format, but like I think the deck is just too slow and kind of does what Raffia does, but like significantly worse. There's not really much reason to play the deck unless you're just like the biggest FF12 fanatic. Fran stuff is pretty good though. I'm gonna like put like Fran Sky Pirates at like tier 3, but like that deck doesn't play the 6 CP Vaughn, just doesn't have room for it. Similarly, like the Bosch self mill deck, I'm not gonna put it in tier 2 because I think it's still a bit fragile. Like you have to play like a really decent critical mass of FF12 cards to get there. but then you have to play non FF12 cards because you like the payoffs for like the self mill Bosch are like weirdly both in FF12 because if you don't do that, then you don't get to draw with them every turn. But if you don't have these like non FF12 payoffs, then like that means that, like all of your deck is engine, and there's no room for like ways to attack against the meta. Cards like Mist Dragon, I think, are like really hard to fit into the deck, which like really hurts the deck's ability to like grind. So I'm gonna put it in tier 3. It is really fun to play. Speaking of fun decks to play that I don't think have a ton of viability, Warp Golbez is one of the most fun decks. Like I think that everybody should play it once. If you're just a fan of the game, doesn't cost you anything. Go on Octagon, go on Untap, download a Warp Golbez deck, and just play it and smile. It is genuinely one of the saddest things that like they did not print these Archfiends until this set, because if this deck had ever been tier 1, I think the game would have been better for it. Like it is such a high skill ceiling deck that like feels so fun to play and so cool. But I ultimately don't think that like it's the right way to play anything. I will say it's a really good shell for Yuna. Or like Yuna's really good in the deck because you can play cards like Hooded Man and Theodore that like really raise Yuna's ceiling. But I don't think that like the deck actually has any like actual viability. I'm gonna put Earthwind, like the retainers, in like tier 3. I generally think that like it's just a worse mono Earth deck for the most part. Like you have some anti aggro tools from like the retainers, and like being able to go like Noctis into Gladio is really good. The downside is that like mono Earth also gets to kind of do that, and when you can do the mono Earth thing and lose, it loses so hard to mono Earth because it's kind of like the deck only can play on its own turn for the most part. It's not a very interactive deck. So you kind of get beat to 5 backups by the Mono Earth deck, and then the Mono Earth deck can do like Leo Waltitas and kind of win the game on the spot. And like a lot of times, like the Mono Earth, the Earthwind Retainers deck is like, it's really praying to dodge that matchup. It's got like okay matchups into like Warriors. It can do okay into Knights. Like you can kind of squint and see a world where this deck is playable, but like I think everything it does is probably just worse than what the Mono Earth decks are doing. I'm gonna put Mono Wind in like tier 2. I don't really know why. I have Luso as like the proxy for Storm, and like Ace is the proxy for like Mono Wind in particular. You have to get really good matchups, but it did. Like Eureka played it because he thought it had a okay enough matchup into Knights, like it was playable. It does have an okay matchup into like Refia. It does well into Realm. It's just it has to find a way to beat Yuna probably, which I don't know if it does have a way. Like you'd have to dodge that and like some of the aggro decks around. Like I wouldn't take this to a tourney, but if you're a really dedicated mono win player or European, you might actually be able to make this deck work. I think the Scion OTK deck is probably not really where you want to be. I'm going to put it in like Rogue because it probably is not far enough away from getting results to where I should put it there. I'm going to put WAF kind of in everything else. I think that like I would put WAF below these, but which is kind of sad. I think WAF has some really cool cards, but like nothing really stands out. I think like the Tilica Loop deck, probably honestly, if you're going to play it, you should just play the Hitflow combo deck. Hitflow combo is so much faster, so much harder to interact with. Yeah, I'm gonna put it in everything else. I really don't think there's a reason to play this deck while Hythlodaeus is legal. Um, 4-color good stuff, or sorry, 4-color good stuff. I'm gonna put in like tier 2. I think there's still like potential there. Same for Golbez. I think like both of these can kind of go in similar decks and kind of have similar shells. Really interesting, powerful cards that I think could do things in the future. And actually, I'll say that the Golbez LB actually is better than I thought it was going to be. Um, Cecil Cat 4, I actually think could be tier 1. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being a better way to play Yuna than the current like Viking heavy list. Given that like you get to abuse Yuna in a way that like the Viking lists don't get to. However, it is a slower deck. Um, those decks can play Rydia. I'm going to put Rydia in tier 3, probably just mostly due to lack of representation. Like, Cecil seeing play in even Unidecks that aren't, like, using Rydia. But I wouldn't be surprised if, like, that ended up being a deck worth playing. Kingslave, I think, just falls under everything else. I really don't think this deck has any new viability or things that change to make it worth playing. Mono Ice Aggro, I think like or like Turbo Discard, I think you could still probably put in like tier 2 or tier 3. I'm gonna put Dancers in Rogue. I will say I think Dancers are a deck that is really close to being like tier 2. Way closer than I think people give them actual credit for. Mono Water, tier 2. It's always a good time to be a mono water player. The deck just is always going to be like somewhat viable. Leo actually probably should go in tier 2. And hot take, I think Bunavel's probably actually is a tier 2 deck. But like in a really interesting way. So I started messing around with it. I talked about it a bit, and Steve D even like posted a deck profile, not like a full like video profile, but like on Facebook. But the best way I can describe it is that like Bunavel's is the best card in the game to unethically play. As in like if you could cheat any single card into play, nothing is better to cheat into play than Bunavel's. Because yes, you might have to sacrifice 2 or 3 or 4 things, but nothing else can rip your opponent's entire hand in response to it. I think like Leo decks are currently like kind of seeing just how crazy that effect can be. But I actually think like Zonde, being able to get like a 2 CP discount on Bunavel's and then sacking your whole field to rip your opponent's entire hand, it is the thing that like could give a mono lightning kind of mid range deck the ability to go late against like other mid-range control decks while still having like the Astola loops for aggro. Like if you establish like Astola plus Estinian, you just kind of win the game, right? And I think that Bunavel's gives that deck a top end in a way that it just never had before. So I'm gonna put Bunavel's in tier 2. It probably doesn't have some of the results that his other decks do outside of like Leo, but I think it's worth keeping in mind. Twins. It's a good time to be the Twins. I don't think you're going to see a ton of them. Like, you can see them as like a package in Warriors, but I think they're going to be relatively rare. I'm going to put them in tier 2 because I think it's like the best time to be Porum in the history of the game. Or like one of the best times. But I don't know if like the days of like dedicated Firewater Twins are going to like ever really come back. Even though the package is so small, it's 3 Palom, 3 Porum, and then like 2 to 3 Leonora, and like you have a Twins deck. Soiree, I'm gonna put in like tier 3. I think like you could just do stronger things than what Soiree is offering at this point. Just play a 4-color good stack, or a good stuff deck instead. Icewind, I think is gonna be tier 3. Again, this is like the ceiling is higher than Mono Wind in some ways, but like you don't need to have a higher ceiling Mono Wind deck. And I don't think like I know some people have talked about like maybe Len is the missing piece for Icewind, but like I don't think Len is going to fix the issues that were holding Icewind back from being the dominant way of playing Storm. I think you could see it. I think it could do well, but I think that in general, if you're good at playing a Wind Storm deck, you should be focusing on playing Mono Wind and not diluting it with Ice. Especially because Fina is just like so good. I think Mono Fire actually is about tier 2 for like Mono Fire control specifically. This thing might not even focus on Montleonis, but there's just like enough removal you can play to condense the game down and make Knights and all these decks like really struggle to kind of end if they don't have a bigger end game. and like Montleonis for like a Tyvis or like a a Terra is actually really strong. Um, Ice Earth. So fun fact: this bridge actually is seeing play. Um, it saw play in Hara's Soldiers deck. I think that, like Ice Earth Control probably is about tier 3. I think that generally right now you're better off playing Mono Ice if you have the choice. And if you feel like you need more removal, then you just play Clive Torgal. I don't know why Reno's still on here. I guess like more dedicated Turks decks. Like I think that like the Lightning Reno is really strong. Um, I think like actual like Turk OTK decks. I think Cisne is a really strong card. I don't think that like the critical mass of Turks is necessarily there. We really need the Elena to come through to push this deck into being tiered. I think, but like I think the shell is potentially there to to be something in the future for like true Turks like and nothing else decks. Um, Mira like mono like Earth Monsters. I think probably goes in like tier 3. I think it's like one of the weaker monster like it's hard because some of these decks are playing Realm, some of them aren't. I think like Earth Water Monsters probably is about tier 2. Um, it's tier 1 if your name is Tori Kelly, but like for anyone else, it's probably like you should be playing Fire, Water, or Water Lightning if you wanted to play like a Water X deck. And I think like the one cost Mira like really slow control monster decks probably are better than anything I would put in Rogue here, but I don't think they're common enough to see it in like tier 2. Um, yeah, I'm gonna put like Warriors of Darkness in tier 3 as well. Again, kind of a strong Haymaker deck, but not anything that's going to be super common at tournaments. Cat 8 probably goes here as well. I'm gonna put Siren actually in tier 2. It's a weird time to be Siren. It is really good in the right matchups. Refia can struggle to out Siren. Knights can struggle to out like a Siren plus an Une. But like Yuna does not care about this card at all. Same for like some of the monster decks. Like they could just like sack a Marlboro and all of a sudden now the Siren doesn't have text. So we'll see what comes of this deck, but I think it's got a lot of potential still. I think Siren is just one of the strongest cards, giving effectively your entire field the inability to be targeted if you build your deck the right way. Um, I'm gonna. This is kind of a hot take, but the Rug aggro decks probably should go around tier 3. They're just too fragile compared to what like Knights and Yuna are doing. They're really obnoxious and they're really good. And you might see them in like those like mono ice turbo discard decks, like the ones that I mentioned with Animus. Maybe it should be tier 2, but you really do open yourself to losing to like just about everything if you go like Rug Sephiroth and try to like rip 2 cards from your opponent's hand. Like you'll win games, but like there's so little agency in these decks that like I would worry about them at like big tourneys. I think the Examil stuff is like a sub theme you could put for mono water, so I'm gonna put it next to the Ash. I think that like the Uni here is representing like those like water, fire, EX burst control decks that like were so popular in like Opus 23 and Opus 24 as like a way to survive chaos. Like, what's the chaos deck gonna do if it hits like a gazillion bursts? I think these are exceptionally poorly positioned to handle the unit decks that are coming out, and they always had terrible matchups against like so many other decks in the meta. So I think they're going to completely fall out of favor. I think Griever, like prison decks, probably go in like tier 3. If you want to play like a turbo discard deck, you should just play like the really aggro versions rather than like Griever plus like a Sage Rosa combo. Similar for like the Reagan plus Kieran decks. Like I think they're better than everything in Rogue, but like probably not the most potent decks. I think Tidus is the most interesting card in the set as far as like something to build around that like could win games in the future. I I don't think it's solved. I don't know what the right way to build this guy is. Like, is it like, because I don't think water wind is the right way, right? But you could play a 4-color Tidus deck. You could play a like 3-color build potentially, and like I don't really know what the Tidus deck looks like, right? I think like mono water Tidus could actually be a thing between like the Waka backup or the Waka forward from Opus 24, combined with like a bunch of like Piranha is really good in the deck, like. And like every time I've played with and against this card, it's a house. It's one of the strongest cards in the set. I just don't really know what to make of like where this card is going to be by the end of the set. I think it has like the highest potential of any legend, but I also don't like. Well, I guess like not Yuna, but like highest potential that we haven't seen so far, right? Like I don't think Yuna's going to get better. I think as people start to kind of like solidify what the best Yuna decks look like, and we're not going to be at that point with Tidus. But I would say that like the difference between like the Yuna decks we're playing now and the Yuna decks we're playing in the future, we're like probably 85-90% of the way there. I feel like the Tidus decks are like maybe halfway correct at this point in a way that like just hasn't really been a thing. And kind of the same sentence that I used about Lucia last set, where like I think like these are just like really underdeveloped archetypes that like could, with the right pilot, like a really smart deck builder, you could find something in these decks that like really could take over the metagame. Maybe like a Hara could really do that, but that's pretty much it. I got the Garuda here representing like water wind monsters, which I think is like actually viable and like a really good shell for that, but might struggle a little bit more with the Yuna than some of the other realm decks could. And definitely will struggle a bit more with knights. You have to like beeline for either like the double Yuffie or a Benedicta Garuda play, right? And even like Benedicta Garuda is not amazing because then like the Knights player can replay a lot of their stuff. But yeah, like it's a really fun format. I'm really enjoying it. I've got like so many decks. Everything seems viable and fun and interesting. There's definitely some frustrations. I think that like Yuna, like I said, really can lead to some really unfun game states. Same with like Knights kind of end games a lot faster than I would like for what's the best deck in the format. But like, I think this is like a really healthy format. I think that like honestly, I could see some of these tier 3 decks winning events. Like, I think like FF6 has the potential to. I think like the crystal stuff is like way better than people give it credit for. I think Hitler could win an event if the person runs a little hot on the day. I think like the Fran and Bosch decks are really underdeveloped. Paul exists in Oceania, and he's going to play a Iridia deck whether I want him to or not. So it could win an event. Like, there's a lot of tier 3 decks that I actually think are capable of winning events if they're played properly. And that was not the case last set. I really think that like the removal of chaos opened up the format in a way that like is really cool. So let me know what you think of the tier list. If you agree, disagree, think I'm totally crazy. It's kind of hard because I think that, like so many archetypes overlap. So talking about it like it's like yeah, Realm is here, but I'd say like the Water Lightning is like down here. It's like Realm is just a tier 1 thing that you can do, and then there's like a bunch of different variants of it. It's like all really complicated and kind of like doesn't work exactly how I like to, but I think it's a good way of kind of talking about the game and the format in a pretty cool way. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one.